Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to the Sweet Nothings podcast, or welcome full stop if it's your first time. Thank you for choosing to spend your limited time on earth listening to this nonsense. It's much appreciated. If you are new here, or in case you've just forgotten, the Sweet Nothings podcast is your home of relaxed, funny, and informative chats all about the love of eating. We'll talk about the latest food trends, controversial opinions, and all things edible. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, I first of all want to touch upon, of course, what has been happening in terms of food trends this month. It's no secret that Easter began in this month of April, and while it seemed to be quite late this year, some years it feels like it comes very early and others feels like you wait 12 months after Christmas to have another excuse to have a novelty shaped chocolate. Easter was around, I think, the 17th of this month, and as always brought with it its fair share of edible nonsense. My personal highlights include Marks and Spencer decided to kind of really keep just milking the colander caterpillar trend. They had this kind of wave of, controversy and publicity this time last year when they had a legal battle with Aldi over the kind of copyright infringement of a chocolate cake shaped like a caterpillar, just in case you thought that British people really weren't engaged in enough kind of meaningful debate. Yeah. And to kind of really just drive home that they're passionate about this product more than any of their customers are, is the terrifying Easter version that they released at the end of last month and the beginning of this month. Now, for visual viewers, I will put a picture up for you because truly you have to see this thing to understand how terrifying it is. But if you are listening audio only on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, I would implore you, if you have 30 seconds to waste, to head to the Marks and Spencer food PR page on Instagram and have a look at their Easter post with this thing, because dear Lord, haunting. It's essentially the body of a Colin the Caterpillar cake, being a kind of swirly chocolate cake with some very basic chocolate icing in the middle and a semi-solid chocolate shell, like it's sliceable, but it doesn't really melt. It's just like a sheet of chocolate around the outside, some little white chocolate feet, and where there would normally be a delightful white chocolate caterpillar face that children and adults alike would fight to be the recipient of, they decided to stick a rabbit's face on the front. Obviously kind of trying to tie in with the Easter bunny theme, forgetting just the horrendous image of a rabbit's head on a caterpillar's body. Even in cake form, it doesn't really become any less kind of Lewis Carroll or, just any other kind of straight up body horror image. It's not pretty. It makes no sense. Why not just make a rabbit? Why not just make, Bob the Bunny with exactly the same cake recipe, just in a different shape? Bother to do anything except just using a rabbit face mold and sticking it on a pre-existing product. I beg. Secondly, there was Waitrose's kind of attempt at picking up on some Easter hype and publicity with some nonsense in yet again enlisting controversial and semi-nonsensical chef Heston Blumenthal to create an Easter product for them. If you are unfamiliar with Heston, he was the creator once of an ejaculating cake. I did say ejaculating. And he also tried to recreate many of the foods from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. For example, he did a whole TV show where he wanted to test out real life lickable edible wallpaper. I remember around Christmas time, he once did a program where he wanted to make a dessert that incorporated frankincense, gold, and myrrh in edible form. The guy's one of these people who would call himself like a molecular chef. Very talented, very creative, mildly unbearable. Anyway, he created an apple, like a big novelty edible Easter apple as part of Waitrose's lineup, which just really is devoid of all sense, if you ask me. I mean, the Easter season isn't one we think of for eating apples or even any kind of apple imagery. As we get into the falling leaves of September and October, even into November, where, the white girls have pumpkins all over the place. Apples kind of make sense in that golden brown shade of festive seasonal foods. An apple product would make sense, both in flavour and colour, appearance, marketing, everything. The apple was strange enough as a choice, especially when it was made of chocolate, I believe, and even weirder was the fact that both the colour and the shape looked like a bum. Like buttocks, like an actual arse. It's obviously stunt food at this point. It works as publicity, but I feel like we're all very, very quickly getting over this kind of behaviour. Aldi also desperately clinging to any kind of idea without having to actually create a new product, decided to post publicity shots on Twitter and on Instagram of them having halved a chocolate Easter egg and filling it with a full English breakfast in one example. So your beans, your toast, your eggs, your sausages, your bacon, all inside a chocolate egg, and another was a full Sunday dinner. So your Easter roast lamb or roast beef joint with potatoes, gravy, Yorkshire puddings. It's just tiring at this point. I feel like the Instagram users of 2013 to 2014 may have been kind of, shocked and into this kind of silly examples of promoting products without actually having to create anything. But at this point, why? We look at it and we see a waste of food when a lot of people can't afford food. It's not even the kind of thing that dances along the line of, oh, maybe I would try that. No, it's just grim. It's the Weetabix and beans chaos of last year all over again with absolutely nothing to back it up. You could say it's creative. You could say whichever kind of 18-year-old intern came up with the idea to post that on the Instagram page deserves some kind of, commendment for it. Fair enough. But you could just release a nice new Easter egg. You could start a new tradition. Start something nice people can do with their families around food. Make people's lives easier and happier. Don't traumatize us further. We've all been through enough this year. But aside from the Easter nonsense, of which there was plenty, those were just my personal 3 favourites of this month of April. Starbucks also released a new Frappuccino. They released something this month known as the Forget-Me-Not Frappuccino. This is a Frappuccino, one of the ones that doesn't contain any coffee. If you're a Starbucks or other coffee shop goer, you may know that the Frappuccinos can either kind of come with coffee and various mix-ins and flavourings, or they're just basically a straight-up milkshake with a fancy faux Italian name. So the Forget-Me-Not Frappuccino, available for a limited springtime time, is a combination of orange and vanilla in a Frappuccino. Imagine like cream or ice cream or ice with some vanilla flavouring and some orange puree stuff in there with some whipped cream on top. Sounds very refreshing. Looks pretty nice. It's a very kind of pastel orange colour. Why is it called the Forget-Me-Not Frappuccino? Is the thing I just can't fully wrap my head around. The flavours aren't really springtimey, even if they are a pastel colour, which I guess someone could argue fits on the palette for springtime, but it's not orange season. There's nothing particularly orange heavy around the flavours that we typically eat at Easter time, as far as I'm aware. Yes, and perhaps a hot crust bun or in other kind of European bakes, but it tends to be an undernote rather than, oh, it's orange season. And the thing that gets me the most is the title. A Forget-Me-Not Frappuccino would be a fantastic name for a Frappuccino released around Valentine's Day, for example, because there's a kind of, love hearts romantic element to it. But then I thought, oh no, perhaps it's named for the flower, the Forget-Me-Not. I had in my head that a Forget-Me-Not was not orange, so I googled it just to be sure, and absolutely, positively, Forget-Me-Nots are blue. So unless they are edible and they taste of orange and I am just entirely misinformed, I have absolutely no idea why they decided to call this drink the Forget-Me-Not Frappuccino. But, as long as someone's having a good time and no one's getting hurt, it's probably fine. And aside from the bizarre marketing tactics of giant conglomerates over the past month, the biggest kind of food trend that has stuck its head out from TikTok this month, potentially even towards the end of last month, but only became on my radar at the start of April, is people putting espresso in their orange juice. I believe it began from one particular woman on TikTok who kind of shared her hot take that espresso and orange juice is actually delicious together, that they balance nicely, that they go well together. And in fact, while you do think of it as a strange concept, I told a friend here in Italy about it, and he said, most people drink espresso and orange juice together at breakfast time. Can't be that strange, can't be that dangerous or controversial to combine. And apparently, while I've yet to taste it, it's apparently not too bad. People have been saying this is quite a balanced thing. It produces a horrendous colour that's somewhere between, the vivid orange of fresh or even, your standard Sunny D type orange juice combined with the dark brown of espresso just becomes this murky sort of dishwater shade. However, it's apparently quite balanced. I thought the acidity of both would just turn it into an absolute bomb of disgust, but apparently not. Do let me know your thoughts though. I'm still quite troubled by it. But for the most part, that is pretty much what has been spoken about this month in food. Social media hasn't been bursting with the same kind of trends that we saw at this point last year when many of us were still creeping our heads out of lockdown. When things do pop up, they do tend to be pretty ridiculous because they've had to stick their head above much other content, for example, the espresso and orange juice. But one particular piece of food news is what I want to dedicate the rest of this podcast episode to, because it just grinds my gears, to be honest. And what I'm talking about is the UK government's decision to display calorie counts on restaurant menus as a legal requirement. Now, a little bit of backstory. This is something that has been discussed in the Parliament at Westminster in London in the United Kingdom that acts for all four nations. If you are out with the United Kingdom, I know it's all a bit of a bloody mess. It's even worse when you're in it. But this is an idea that has been floated around for at least 2 years now. I remember posting a lot on social media about it back in the summer of 2020, and I don't believe the idea was brand new then. I think it may have already been floated or discussed as a future bill at that time. Obviously, several spicy things have kind of occurred between summer 2020 and now to take up the time, but it has been introduced as of this month that restaurants with over 250 members of staff in any capacity, whether they work front of house, in the kitchen, admin, anything, they will be legally required to display the calorie counts of their menu items on the menu for all customers. And I have several thoughts about this, as many people both in and out of the industry did on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, everything. It's something that isn't entirely new, I must preface. For example, if you go to McDonald's or if you go to, I think, Burger King as well, you will often see calorie counts on the menus for individual items, especially if you use the digital screens that many of the kind of stores in the UK and Europe have now. You will often see the calorie count just listed beside the menu item itself. And some chains such as Wetherspoons in the UK, which is a large pub chain, they also, next to all of their drinks and all of their food, have calorie counts displayed. Now, it's not surprising for Wetherspoons. The Wetherspoons owner is kind of notoriously a little bit controversial, a little bit edgy. So it doesn't surprise me that it's there. And while I'm not entirely sure the reason that McDonald's or Burger King display their calorie counts, they have been there for a good few years now as well. Now, the problem isn't having the numbers there necessarily by choice of the restaurant, especially, especially if the restaurant is, an enormous chain like McDonald's. It touches every single continent on this planet and probably in space soon. But creating the legal requirement to have it and making it more commonplace doesn't seem to do anything but damage, in my opinion. I asked you guys on social media, and there was more of a split than I expected, which is always welcome because I do like to hear people's views before I start spewing my venom on the internet. But the views typically seem to be 60% disagreed with this new rule and 40% agreed with it. It's not that this new rule is going to be the absolute downfall of society or the restaurant industry as a whole in the United Kingdom, but it just doesn't seem to be rooted in enough evidence from what the general public can see. The basis for introducing it is that there is what is often referred to as an obesity crisis in the United Kingdom, meaning that a large number of the population are overweight and or obese. And while this can have impacts on individual health and it can have impact on the National Health Service as a whole, it's something that our country has not been able to kind of do anything about for the past 30 to 35 years at this point. Britain has just continued to be a nation that has a large number of overweight and obese people within the population across all age groups. But the issue we seem to face in the UK is demonizing the problem and never looking at it as anything to be tackled by education, anything to be tackled by understanding, or even anything to be tackled by physical and mental treatment when and where possible. Instead, there tend to just be these bizarre rug pull decisions made by governments to try and tackle the issue of obesity head on, or the problems that obesity can lead to head on. Another fairly recent example was the sugar tax, for example, as it was lovingly referred to, which has essentially resulted in every single company, apart from Coca-Cola, of course, because they have money to do anything, having to drastically reduce or completely remove the amount of sugar from their drinks, but just pump it up with artificial sweeteners instead. So, for example, a big impact was felt in my home country of Scotland when big kind of national soft drink chain Bar decided to change all of their recipes. They didn't have the funding to pay the tax that they would have had to pay on the sale of each drink, as far as I understand it, with having the quantity of sugar that each drink contained. These being drinks such as their fizzy cherryade or their orangeade or their most famous recipe, Iron Brew, which is generally considered, if you are under the age of 60 and don't have the money for whiskey, it's considered essentially the national drink of Scotland. It's a big deal. A lot of people consider it a very effective hangover cure. A lot of people love the taste because it's unlike any other fizzy drink and you can't buy it anywhere else. It's not like Fanta or Coca-Cola where people have different versions. It just straight up does not exist outside of Scotland. So the sugar tax had a huge impact on businesses, on well-loved brands, but it did almost nothing, as far as we have seen, to tackle any kind of obesity statistics, which was the whole idea behind introducing the sugar tax. Because brands like Coca-Cola have so much money, they were just able to pay the tax to keep the original recipes, to keep people buying their products. The problem was not the sugar, and the solution was not taxing the sugar content. Anyway. And I can't help but feel similar vibes from this month's decision in introducing these calorie counts. If calorie counts have existed on the menu of fast food chains and of large pub chains in the United Kingdom, and they have not been a singular source of, remarkable weight loss among their customers, what evidence do we have that this will be a good decision? As far as I'm aware, this isn't a practice that goes on in countries that have lower obesity rates or healthier eating habits. It's not like countries that contain these blue zones where people live to the age of 100 and everyone is fabulously healthy and looks fit and young all the time. It's not like the secret to their success was having calories listed on the menu. It swims completely over my head. But the idea has notably split opinion, with a lot of people saying, we need to do anything to tackle the obesity crisis. We need to do anything to help people young and old out in losing weight and keeping it off. But the other half of the public, where I sit, in case you hadn't guessed already, is much more along the lines of, people don't need to be infantilized with decisions like this, and that it will do more harm than help, especially for younger diners in these places. If you're someone who is already over the age of 50, perhaps carrying a little bit more weight than you like and would like to make some healthier choices, perhaps this is a decision that will be beneficial for you if you eat out regularly and you want to make informed choices. Absolutely. However, if the same person was to bring their 14-year-old daughter or their 10-year-old son, and they're confronted not only with the option of their food, but their option of the kind of big, heavy number that accompanies their food, and says, "Mum, what does this mean?" This is where you start getting into very, very easily triggered eating disorder territory. And if you're new to the podcast, I don't speak of this simply to irritate or to inflame. I speak of this as someone who has suffered from several forms of eating disorder for over 15 years of my life. And I cannot think of anything worse at the absolute pinnacle of my issues than having this slapped in my face. But without flailing around the word damage, without kind of expanding and elaborating on my opinions, let's get into more of what I feel are the problems here. A calorie is how we refer to what are known as kilocalories. You'll often see kcal written on food packages or occasionally on menus. It means kilocalorie. It's a unit of measurement that measures energy. It doesn't measure fat, it doesn't measure carbohydrates, it purely measures the energy that is contained within that food. Contrary to the post that your mum shares on Facebook, they are not small creatures that hide in your cupboard and sew your clothes tighter as you sleep. Calories are something that many of us have been aware of for a long time now. For at least 10 to 20 years, they've been quite public in their use and their regular measurement. We use calorie measurement to decipher how much energy is in the food and drink that we consume relative to how much energy our bodies use in our day-to-day lives. As a simple example, if you're not someone who, unfortunately, like myself and other listeners, is plagued and obsessed by the discussion of calorie counting, here's a simple example. The average British man, who I believe is around 5'9" in height, is recommended to consume 2,500 calories per day. That's 2,500 calories per day to function regularly and healthily. This equates to roughly 10 regular McDonald's Big Macs in a day, or about 400 sticks of celery, whichever you prefer, or a blend of both. Calories, contrary to what the kind of traffic light system that's used in the United Kingdom of red, yellow and green relative to the amount of salt or fat or anything contained within a foodstuff, calories do not measure whether or not something is healthy. It simply measures the energy. An avocado can contain the same amount of calories as a hefty dose of Nutella, for example. It does not measure nutrition. All it measures is the energy that it provides our bodies with. Counting these calories is something that began gaining popularity in around the late 1980s among your bodybuilder types, because it was an easy way for them to kind of measure what was going in versus what was going out and how they could use that to manipulate their body shape. And the idea by counting them is that if you are trying to gain weight, you will eat more calories than you expend. If you're trying to lose weight, you will consume fewer calories than you expend. It's a relatively simple concept, but that's far from making it easy to make these decisions 3 to 5 times a day, every single day. We all have lives to live, we have stuff to do, and dear Lord, food is not just about numbers. You'll even find that any kind of fad diets that pop up in any shape or form, whatever name they have, are usually just a new way of helping you reduce or increase your calorie intake. The best example I could provide in recent years is that of the intermittent fasting obsession. Everyone was saying, oh, I'm only going to eat between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. so that you eat within a small window all of your meals for the day and fast for the rest of the time. Now, all this was really doing, rather than kind of this fantastic mystical job of resetting the very confusing concept that is metabolism, all it was doing was giving you a time-centered habitual way of consuming fewer calories, simply because you would not need as many within a shorter window of time. Whether or not you felt hungry outwith these hours didn't really matter. If you were consuming all your food within a smaller amount of time, it's likely you would naturally consume less food and therefore fewer calories. And obviously, for some people, this has been an effective mode of losing weight. Some people enjoy these diets, or some people enjoy the simple science behind calorie counting. They understand that if they run 20 miles and only eat a very small sandwich, that they are likely to lose some weight. And it has done wonders for people. Some people have had great success in losing weight that they wanted to lose healthfully in a regular and kind of still nutritious and safe way by gradually reducing their calories relative to the amount that they expend. However, it's also become one of the easiest and most dangerous ways to be sucked into deeply disordered eating, which I can personally attest to. My discovery of calorie counting through apps such as MyFitnessPal was one of my biggest downfalls in my teenage years into just rooting every single thing I ate or even did in my life purely down to balancing the books of calories. And my God, not only is it draining, it's dangerous, and it is all-consuming, if you'll pardon the pun. And while there are relatively healthy guidelines set in many countries as to what the average person should consume, for example, in the United Kingdom, 2,500 calories is normal for a man and 2,000 calories is normal for a woman. These are humans of average build. The average woman, comparative to myself, is quite different. The average woman in the United Kingdom, I believe it's around a size 16 and is about 5'5". I am around a size 8 and I am 5'2". Therefore, there's a little bit of kind of, calculations to be done. And often when you see that your maintenance, if you will, calorie limit is much lower than the average, you panic and you have to restrict your food, and you restrict it so much that you make yourself very ill to the point that you're losing an unhealthy amount of weight, you're completely wrecking your relationship with food, and in more severe cases, you can lose your period, you can damage your fertility in future, you can cause permanent damage to your brain and to your body. It's no joke. Playing with calories for a bit of weight loss is absolutely fine if done healthfully, if it's something your body and brain needs, but it's so easy to become obsessed, and this is where the real problem lies. Now, obviously, those of us with eating disorders are in the minority. There are far fewer people in the United Kingdom and all over the world struggling with eating disorders than those that are struggling with morbid obesity. However, thanks to technology and further education and awareness, restrictive eating disorders are on the rise, likely due in part to our increasing knowledge of nutritional information in every single gram of food we consume. Even outside of the horrific world of disordered eating, you often hear just regular people at work, on the street, in restaurants, discussing the calories of a foodstuff or some kind of drink that they've purchased or that they're looking at before they've even tasted it. They sort of rack it up in their brain whether they have earned it or whether they are worthy of it. I can't tell you, for example, in other times in my life where I would regularly bring cake into an office, or I would bring a dessert over to a friend's house where a comment would be made on the calorie count before they had even finished looking at the bloody dessert or sweet itself. And while our brains kind of run these things through it, there's no need to say it, but we can't help it because we're so obsessively fed the nutritional and calorie information related to foodstuffs that it just becomes second nature, that when you see food, your brain then kind of scans it and analyzes it for how much it's going to be, and you feel like sharing that information with other people. And there is nothing sadder, in my opinion, than the thought of someone being disappointed enough in the calorie content of some delicious food to simply refuse to eat it. It's like asking someone the contents of a wrapped birthday or Christmas gift that they've purchased for you and unhappily handing it back before you've even unwrapped it, because it doesn't matter the effort and the emotional kind of labor they've put into this present. You don't want it. It's not worth it. It's not worth your time. Therefore, you give it back. To hell with the social consequences. Similarly, it's like refusing a casual sexual encounter after asking your would-be partner precisely how many seconds your orgasm is likely to last. You can't It's bizarre, and it's one of the only areas of human life in which we sort of analyze and calculate the amount of joy we're allowed to have from something instead of just bloody having it. Do we want to be remembered at the end of our lives with, here lies Kelly, she knew that a 40-gram bar of Cadbury's dairy milk contained approximately 210 calories, not that she'd eat it. It doesn't really serve anything in the long run, especially if our knowledge of all of these calorie counts hasn't even made a dent in the crisis of overweight and obesity that we're still seeing. Food is so literally crucial to human survival that it seems absolutely obscene that we would reduce it just to numbers. And I'm not trying to sound all kind of hippie and free love with this, as I probably do on many other topics. But nothing else in our life is measured in the same way that we measure food in modern society. As I've mentioned, when it comes to sex, for example, another thing that is absolutely fundamental to human survival and progression, how often do you sit and measure how long the session lasted, how many productive orgasms were had from the session, it really doesn't matter. That's not why you're doing it. You're not doing it for productive purpose other than, some fun, some intimacy, or maybe some baby making, all of which cannot be measured effectively in the moment. Perhaps in weeks and months afterwards, you might see some results, whether you want them or not. That doesn't mean that anything had to be measured there and then to take away from the actual joy and primal pursuit that is the act itself. Similarly with your sleep, how many people measure every second of sleep and the quality of their sleep? And ultimately, would it make any difference to whether or not you felt well rested? You might put your head down on the pillow and think, okay, it's 11:30. I'm planning to wake up at around 6:30 tomorrow. I'll maybe get this amount of sleep. That might be the most you put into it. You're unlikely to measure, even with your fancy Apple Watches nowadays, you're highly unlikely to measure every single second and minute of sleep. Did you wake up a couple of times? Did you go to the bathroom? Was there too much light? Was your partner snoring too much and you had to kick them several times to put them back to sleep? Did you get enough REM sleep? Did you get enough deep sleep? Even if you knew all of these facts and figures, you're probably still going to feel tired, grumpy, and resentful because you had to get up for work in the morning, Or if you only got 5 hours sleep after a great night out, you're probably still going to feel terrible because it's Sunday morning, you had too much to drink and too much to eat last night, and whether or not you can analyze the very millisecond amount of sleep you got, it's probably not going to change the emotional and physical and mental effects that said sleep had on you. Similarly, we shouldn't teach that food is to be treated and measured just as an amount of fuel, rather than a joyous, delicious, social, and deeply cultural matter. Of course, it's a source of fuel and energy. That's the very reason that we consume it. But eating is so much more than bodily function. In the same way that sex is not just a factor in reproduction, your desire for delicious food is nothing sinful or shameful. It is literally how you stay alive, So when it comes to making sweeping decisions affecting restaurants and hospitality, especially in the wake of a pandemic that has already strangled the life out of a lot of restaurants and restaurant culture in the United Kingdom and across Europe and the US, this just feels like such a bad take. It doesn't feel like the correct approach to make. It doesn't make sense that you would apply it only to big chains and not to smaller restaurants. Is that simply a financial decision? Because even then, it doesn't really make any sense. Should there perhaps exist a separate menu in restaurants or fast food joints displaying the calorie content or even the macronutrient breakdown of their meals? Maybe. For places like McDonald's, it makes sense because nothing is kind of handcrafted and cooked. Everything is machine made. Therefore, having a machine-like approach to the calorie count maybe isn't an issue. But would it kill us to have it separately? In the same way that there can be separate vegan options and separate gluten-free options in either a supermarket or in a restaurant. Not everything has to be everything for everyone. Having a separate hard copy, or nowadays, post-COVID, having a separate QR code option for people who would like to see the calorie or nutrient breakdown of a dish, perhaps it would be an option. It could be beneficial for people with chronic illnesses who require that kind of information, those on a specific diet recommended by a medical professional, or people who genuinely just want to be informed and find a healthy way to reduce their calorie intake. But the information just being available for impressionable children, for insecure teenagers, for people who have a history or sadly a future with an eating disorder, teaching people that their food is to be thought of numerically and having it sat right next to, the contents or the basis of a meal just blows my mind. And it's not that I feel that anyone shouldn't know the calorie content of anything, because absolutely it is useful for certain people within the population. It's just so deeply depressing and frankly dystopian to be thinking of our food purely in terms of the energy it will provide us in a time when we are lucky enough to have access to the delicious pleasure that both good cooking, healthy foods, and junk foods can provide us in any context. The dichotomy of good food versus bad food is only going to be bolstered by displaying information about calorie on restaurant menus. And it will only encourage further disordered eating, unhealthy and confused relationships with food. If you see that a side dish of salad is only 100 calories versus a lovely big plate of shepherd's pie, which would be, say, 600 to 900 calories, of course, one is going to look angelic compared to the other, but one will also have you satisfied, fulfilled from a delicious, warm, balanced meal that ticks most of your nutrient boxes, and the other is some iceberg lettuce that will disappear from your stomach and your brain and leave you miserable within a matter of minutes. Life is, as we constantly need to be reminded, it's about balance. And I feel like equating food purely with its numerical content is just not balanced. It's not the way to educate people about eating healthfully. It's not even the way to make people make quote unquote better choices. If you're in a restaurant and you go to a restaurant once a month, why should you have this grand number presented in front of you to make you feel some kind of subconscious shame for this very occasional or even special occasion decision? And presenting calories without any other kind of further nutritional information doesn't even teach people about anything other than the energy content. It doesn't teach people about the effect of carbohydrates or fats or proteins or sugar or salt on their bodies. You're not really teaching people anything. You're just presenting them energy right next to, more importantly, the food and the ingredients of said food. It blows my mind. It's a very, very disappointing decision, in my opinion. I can see that it may have benefits for some people who are able to make healthy, balanced, and informed choices related to their weight, but I can't help but feel it will do more harm than good, especially as children and younger people grow up thinking that this is a normal way to approach eating, because it just isn't. It just isn't. It's just a simple way to reduce a joy and essential part of life to something to be plugged into an app. I really wanted to get this off my chest. It's something I've shared before. It's something I've written about before online, because it is something I do feel very passionately about, not only as a sufferer and survivor of eating disorders, but as someone who tries to think, even more than 6 months ahead in the future as to how this will affect people growing up and people developing in the ever slowly recovering hospitality industry. If you would like to, do let me know on social media. I'm at Maverick Baking everywhere: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. If you'd like, you can email me even at maverickbaking@outlook.com. Do let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you agree, if you think that this is going to do more damage than it's worth, or do you think I'm overreacting based on my own personal lived experience and that this actually won't make any much of a difference, both in terms of weight loss or weight gain or any kind of change, because perhaps it'll just become neutral and invisible to us eventually. as we sit hungry in a restaurant waiting for chips because we don't really care about what we're eating. We just want something tasty, you know? Let me know your thoughts. But that is about all I have time and energy for in this month's episode. It's something that perhaps is not the most interesting of subject, or is even a little bit of a difficult subject for many of you. If that is the case, I would like to kind of thank and congratulate you for getting through this episode. Discussion of calories can be very difficult. But I think when it comes to decisions being made on our behalf, sometimes it can be good to express our feelings and, listen to differing opinions on these kinds of decisions. Thank you so much, as always, for listening, wherever you are listening from, however you are listening, whether it's video, whether it's audio, whatever in the world you are. I really, really appreciate it. I will be back in around a month's time for the May installment of the Sweet Nothings podcast. But for now, I will say thank you and see you for the next one. You're listening to the Sweet Nothings podcast. If you want to support the production, get access to exclusive foodie content, and early access to podcast episodes, you can do so via Patreon. Just search for Sweet Nothings or Maverick Baking on Patreon, and thank you for everything.